Aloha. Today, I wanted to expand a little bit off of pretty much all the videos that I put together, but really kind of put things into order in reference to a timeline that added up to the globe model and that comes after the globe model up until today, and tie in the supremacy story, the so-called racism story, the different races, the manifest destiny mentality, the colonial program, tie all of these things in, including the Moorish story, tie all of these things in and just share how I perceive this timeline and how the human story is not as complex or difficult to understand as we've been led to believe, for the people who even seek that information, because the majority of people, the mainstream mentality is to be consumed by the illusion, which is just subjecting yourself to a hopeless and helpless state of never being able to know anything, which is what the scientism community wants to do with all of this. Everything has to be, the sun is 93 million miles away. The Big Bang was like 99.9999999 forever billions of light years, or light, whatever it is. It's always some invented theory that's so far away from the basic interpretation of of your general concepts that it's only should be left to the so-called powers that be, the so-called intellectuals, to understand and interpret this information for the measly peasants that are out there living off of what the colonial program has brought up for our civilization. Joe Rogan plays this role constantly against Eddie Bravo when he says, how could you just not believe everything that gets put out there by, the smartest people in the world? Come on, there's so many people in the world that have been working together, finding this information and putting this for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've been studying all this, and he's basically just the front man for the illusion and the hopeless and helpless program for the so-called powers that be. He's just one version. He's just the meathead, musclehead version, so-called intellectual mixed in with your regular everyday Joe mentality. That's exactly what he represents. The Joe, everyday Joe mentality. He's Joe regular. And since he's in that, we're in this patriarchal design, he's out there to maintain that basic American way, manifest destiny pretty much mentality. And this is what I really wanted to focus on this video, is the idea of manifest destiny, how the heliocentric model is included with it, what happened before the heliocentric model jumped into the mainstream mentality, and how it's expanded up until today into the NASA programming and so on and so forth, and then related to some of the so-called Moorish history and all of this other stuff. Because when it comes down to it, if you really want to figure out what's going on, one of the easiest ways that I do is I take it to the extremes of asking questions of, there's going to be the extreme of the light, and then you're going to have the extreme of the dark. And what's really going on here is that we have, in a sense, a death of alchemy. We have people who are in alchemy, in a sense that alchemy is a mixture of the balances of true science and the true understanding of spirit. This is what alchemy is. This is what the ancient Cometians and a lot of the ancient spiritual ancestors were tapping into, is the relationship between the scientific interpretations of this reality and the spiritual essence of who and what we are. And our essence, our meaning and purpose to whatever extent that they have gotten to in relation to nature as a whole, the physical and the non-physical. So the physical can be interpreted in some kind of way by a scientific understanding. And then you have the non-physical, which is your spirit, which is what the indigenous and the aboriginal people are heavily tuned into. And you put those two together, you get alchemy. These words like manifest destiny, that's an actual linguistic alchemy. It creates a mentality based upon a particular action. That action was genocide. That action was the destruction of nature. That action was the complete and utter demonizing of the indigenous and the aboriginal people by calling them savage, calling them primitive, and saying that since we are the next evolutionary step, the colonizers, we have a destiny to conquer and destroy these people because they are coming from a primitive and savage background. They are coming from a primitive and savage relationship to this reality. What they won't tell you is that their entire interpretations of reality are completely null and void from the spiritual perspective, which is why the religious program was invented. Mainstream religions were invented to push off the facade of having a spiritual connection. The melanated genetics are dominant. The so-called Caucasian genetics are recessive. So between now and 500 years from now, there will be significantly less so-called white people. This is not a racist perspective. This is an actual scientific fact that your scientists have already understood. What I'm saying is that for people who have difficulty with hearing this information, what I'm saying is that this information was not known hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This was very well understood by the people who started the colonial program, who started the supremacy program and the genocides and the massacres that go throughout history. This was very well known. What I want to go through today is what happened before that. How did they end up knowing that information, and you can already see what's happening today, what it peaked to. So you have interpretations or definitions like manifest destiny. That's an actual alchemy that says we are the dominant, destined by God force on this reality. And if you have to die for us to be successful, then so be it. This is why the education system only tells you this sort of information. It's no different than only telling you the heliocentric perspective, because once you start unraveling the heliocentric perspective, you start unraveling the public education system, the intentions of the university system, the intentions of the political system, the Democrats and Republicans, the intentions of the colonial program, the Queen of England, and the pretty much the viral takeover of the indigenous and the aboriginal people across the earth plane, installing of the English language, installing of Spanish, installing of all of these alchemical perspectives and spells, for lack of a better word, that separate you from your balances of nature, your essence, and your true interpretation, understanding, and understanding of this reality, so you do not threaten the system that calls itself destined to be rulers over you. This is at the core of the heliocentric model. These are your so-called masters of the universe. They have given you your language. They have given you your so-called education and intelligence. They give you your future. They give you your time, your moment right now with money and work and all of this other all this other stuff that comes from the mainstream so-called Western civilization. It's all been given at an expense of pretty much your blood. The blood of the people is the payment for Western civilization. This is what religionism is. This is what scientism is. If you at all, this is why flat earth is such a threat to the system. It's questioning the very nature of its manifestation. It questions the very nature of your so-called powers that be. So yes, it will be demonized and laughed at and mocked to the umpteenth degree, because everybody who thinks that they are something based upon the system that is based on illusions or nothing, they themselves will lose their illusory power. You have people who live in harmony with nature. And then you have at the other end of the extreme, people who will destroy nature for their own benefit. This is what the system is today. This is what the extremes of control of the scientism community is today. It is those people who have anchored themselves in the materialistic version of reality that have sold their particular alchemy to other people who are caught in between the spirit and the science, the alchemical interpretations of reality, who have sold the materialistic idea of this reality to people in order to maintain control over the masses. This is the haves and the have-nots program in action. It's not as simple as black and white, but it's not void of that perspective when you include and understand the supremacy program and also the so-called protection of the white genetic annihilation. This survival of the fittest, this manifest destiny, this superiority supremacy program needed to be installed into the masses. This is why you have the blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus program is to protect that program, is to protect that storyline. So this is why when you see on the local news even today, you hear a black man was shot or a black woman was shot and killed, and internally the news doesn't give a shit about that. They don't give a fuck about melanated people. In fact, they will allow those murders and all that other shit to be amplified in your mentality, so you become desensitized to that. But you will have a white woman or a white man who is killed by whoever, especially if it's by a so-called melanated person. That shit will be blown up like crazy. It will be blown up. This is the same program as the blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus program to make you more sensitive to that mentality. This is no different than why I bring out information about the human story in reference to its relationship to the flat earth story, and why it's extremely important to tell the human story right next to the so-called flat earth story, because you cannot understand the depths of the flat earth story, the heliocentric deception, if you don't understand why the heliocentric deception was invented in the first place, who benefits from it, why it's still going on today, why it was invented in the first place, why. So it's the same program. It's learn all of this information, steal it, sell it back to the populace to maintain a particular perspective, and then use it against the people to sell another story 20 years down the line, 200 years down the line, 500 years down the line, to maintain the illusion of dominance and control. So before the colonial program from the Columbian era happened, all of the sciences came from Egypt. Just like in Greek and Roman, all that shit came from Egypt. So all of the sciences that were just were interpreted by Socrates and Plato and all these other people who just copied and pasted from ancient Kemet, And same thing with the Mayans and the Incas, and they were doing the same thing. It's just a different style, but it was at a peak at Kemet, at the pyramids. So this is why you have pyramids in Mexico. This is why you have pyramids in Central America, so on and so forth. You have all this stuff. This was an actual science, an interpretation of this reality that was being maintained and expanded upon from a spiritual perspective. And like I said, you will have people who want to use that magic for themselves. This is what we are understanding today. This is what we are unveiling today. And one of the biggest reasons why people can't unveil this shit is because they are in the religion of scientism, the university system, politics, the Columbian era, the manifest destiny, peak of human civilization mentality. People can't let that shit go. It's like letting go of the Jesus program. It's the same thing. So you have the Moors, who pretty much were integrating with the Caucasians in Europe after invading Spain. This is why the British Empire doesn't like the Spaniards or the Italians, because they're too mixed. They got too much brown in their blood. This is why the Portuguese, the Italians, the Portuguese, the Italians, and the Spaniards are not accepted by so-called white races, pure, so-called pure white races. Spanish people and Portuguese people are not accepted because they are of a mixed blood with the early Moors. This is why the Portuguese and the Spanish had to, with Christopher Columbus, the Spanish was empowered to go and destroy the melanated people of North and South America. They had to prove themselves to the so-called powers that be of that time, which are still the same so-called powers that be of today. It's a supremacy program in a different suit. Back then they had swords and sailboats. Today they have tanks and jets, fighter jets. It's the same shit. People trying to prove themselves to a program that doesn't give a fuck about nature, humanity, the indigenous people, connection to spirit, anything like that. It only is based upon the materialistic version of reality. And it is manifest destiny that when we came to the New World, that we should eradicate the Native Americans and the Aboriginal Americans. We should eradicate them to fulfill our manifest destiny. The Native American and the Aboriginal American, what happened in the so-called United States, Mexico, Canada, Hawaii, all this is just a microcosm of the macrocosm that has been going on for centuries upon centuries, dominating with intellectual, holier-than-thou mentalities, selling it back to people as this is the only way. And if you don't follow it, you get the sword. So either you read this book, either you follow this religion, either you go to this school, either you do these jobs, or you fucking die by the sword. That is what has led up to this control program that we are seeing today. And the heliocentric model is the intellectual sword for humanity. It is the pinnacle of that intellectual sword. And the hand on that intellectual sword is the protection of white genetic annihilation. Since all these people in Hollywood are not telling you these stories, who are not speaking up, who are not saying anything about how things are and why things are, and allowing you to be consumed by what things are, which is the illusion of what's going on, the checkers game, since they are the ones that you trust as your pastors and your preachers for the mainstream religion and scientism religion, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and all your Hollywood actors and musicians and rappers and athletes and all this other shit. You believe all these assholes. You believe them. And as long as you keep believing that since they say everything's okay, then everything is just okay, then the puppeteers behind pulling their strings will continue to expand the program, which has its own motives. So the people who sold out back in the day, the Moors back in the day who sold out, and that's why I said these are factions, certain people, not all of the Moors, some certain people who will do certain things and other people who won't. And like I said, Moors just means black. So you have sellout blacks back then, just like you had sellout blacks today. And you have sellout everything else back then. You have sellout today. It's the same shit. People who only are concerned with their own materialistic versions of reality and will take that at the expense of everybody else. So the same program that's existing today with Hollywood and all your actors and all your other people who are just telling you to vote and focus on Trump and Obama and Hillary Clinton and all that other shit, that's just an expansion of the distraction program to keep you from understanding, understanding, and overstanding the origins of this reality, the origins of this story. And this is why the so-called global warming and climate change shit, all that stuff, overpopulation stuff, all those programs exist to make you think that you should be focusing on them to be your saviors, to fix the world, when in fact they were the ones who destroyed it on purpose. It's destroyed on purpose so they can have something to have the illusion of fixing. This is why I said now that people are interpreting the heliocentric program for what it is, when flat earth goes mainstream, they can just say, okay, yeah, well, the bad guys were these guys and now we're the good guys. And this is what real science is. This is what's really going on. It's a game that's being played. And this whole thing it goes down to the blood of the earth, the blood of humanity. So the idea of manifest destiny has become the natural format of human innovation or progress or existence on this earth plane. So you accept the animalistic behaviors of colonial new world agenda pushers at the expense of nature. This is why you have the focus so much on technology, the focus on aliens, the focus on Mars and the moon, and they don't give a fuck about the rainforest, poverty, the homeless, the food, the water, the air. In fact, it's the opposite. You have genetically modified food, genetically modified minds, genetically modified everything, water fluoridated, dumbing you down, destroying the air, destroying the forest. All this is so-called natural, only for a synthetic version of reality. What got lost in the sauce of everything was the destruction of alchemy as a whole, the balances of nature, the balances between true science and the spiritual interpretations of this reality. It got thrown out of whack for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. So this is the split between what is normal and what is natural. And people who are realizing the heliocentric deception are starting to reconnect with what is natural. It's starting to reconnect with the spirit, starting to reconnect with the true essence of the body, the soul, the mind, and the soul. And when you connect that, you start to activate higher perspectives, higher interpretations of what's really going on. You start getting out of the being consumed by what's going on, like all this conspiracy shit in politics. You stop being consumed by the how stuff is being manipulated by the so-called Illuminati and the cabal and all this other bullshit and conspiracies. And you start asking questions on why, the origins of this reality. Something kicks on. And all of these theories and illusions start to deteriorate naturally. You start to speak the unspoken language. This is what I was talking about, the languages of the soul in the last video. Those languages, you have the languages of the soul that are designed to keep you away from speaking that language. And then you have the languages of the soul that are without words. That is based upon your existence, your natural existence. That is the language that the indigenous and the aboriginal people and the people who are overall just here to experience this reality for what it is on its natural essence and expand it based upon their balances of nature. But there's no profit in that, just like there's no profit in truth. There's no profit. You can't be rich. You can't get rich off of what everybody is already knowing inside of them. You can't get rich off of that shit. This is why you can only get rich off of illusions or the system that is profiting off of the haves and have-nots program, the checker game, the separation from nature, separation from understanding, understanding, and overstanding what's really going on, being enveloped in the understanding. Or the distraction. That's how a lot of people, that's how the majority of people get rich today. Sports, Hollywood, politics, that's all the distraction. That's where the big bucks are. You make big money in distracting people from themselves. So on that note, thank you for joining me. And until next time, from all my relations, peace, love, and harmony.